She stood in the freezing rain, mopping muddy steps outside a building that gleamed like gold, unseen, unheard, and unimportant. But when a wealthy woman splashed her with mud and mocked her without a second thought, no one stepped in. Except one man watching quietly from across the street. What happened next changed everything. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's move forward with the story. Rain poured down steadily on the busy streets of the city. Cars splashed through puddles. People hurried past with umbrellas and coats pulled tightly around them. But in front of the tall glass building known as Varel Plaza, one young woman worked through the cold and wet morning with no umbrella, no coat, and no choice. Nora, just 22 years old, wore a faded sweater and jeans, her shoes soaked through from hours of cleaning. She moved her mop back and forth across the slippery stone steps, trying her best to keep the entrance clean. Rain had turned the sidewalk into a muddy mess, and every time someone walked by, more dirt tracked in. Her hands were stiff from the cold. Her face was pale and tired. But Nora kept going. She needed to finish before noon so she could pick up her younger sister from school. Her father was too sick to work, and every little job counted. This one wasn't easy, but she never complained. She had dreams, quiet ones, but they kept her going. Just as Nora stopped to wring out her mop, a sleek black car rolled up to the building's entrance. It was the kind of car she saw only in magazines. The door opened and out stepped a woman wearing high heels and a coat that looked more expensive than anything Nora had ever owned. Her name was Camille. She was tall, confident, and looked like she belonged on the cover of a fashion magazine. Her sunglasses stayed on even though the sky was gray. People around her moved quickly to open doors and greet her. She didn't seem to notice them. She didn't seem to notice anyone. Nora stepped to the side to let Camille pass, careful not to get in her way. But just as Camille walked by, her sharp heels kicked up a splash of cold brown mud that landed right on Nora's sweater and shoes. Nora gasped softly, looking down at her soaked clothes. She looked up, hoping Camille might say something, anything. Even a quiet sorry would have made a difference. But Camille didn't apologize. Instead, she paused, glanced at Nora with a wrinkle of disgust on her face, and said, "Maybe you should watch where you're standing." Her voice was smooth, but cold. Her tone wasn't just rude, it was cruel. She didn't wait for a reply. With a slight toss of her hair, she walked straight into the building, her heels clicking against the tile floor. Nora stood frozen in place. Around her, a few people glanced over. Someone whispered something and laughed. But no one said a word to Camille. No one helped Nora. She felt her cheeks burn. Her eyes stung not from the rain but from the shame. She quickly looked down and began scrubbing at the mud on her sweater with a rag, trying to hold back tears. It wasn't just about the mud. It was about the way she'd been looked at. As if she were nothing. As if she didn't matter. All she wanted to do was her job, go home and take care of her family, She didn't deserve that kind of treatment. But the world often seemed unfair to Nora. People in shiny shoes and expensive coats walked past her every day without a second glance. They didn't see the girl who worked through sickness and rain. They didn't see the dream she carried quietly in her heart. Still, she kept working. She always did. As she bent down to rinse her mop again, something caught her eye. A man standing across the street. He wasn't holding an umbrella. His coat was old but neat. He stood still, hands in his pockets, just watching. He didn't look away when Nora noticed him. In fact, he gave a small nod, like he saw her. Really saw her. Nora straightened up slowly, unsure what to think. Her first thought was that maybe he felt sorry for her, but something about his expression felt different. It wasn't pity. It was something else, something gentler. For the first time that morning, a small spark of warmth lit in her chest. It was tiny, but it was there. A little flicker of hope. The man looked both ways, then slowly began to cross the street, walking toward her with steady steps. Nora's heart picked up speed. She didn't know why, but she felt like this moment mattered, like something was about to change. She wiped her hands on her jeans, took a small breath, and waited to see what would happen next. Nora stood by the edge of the steps, soaked from the rain and still wiping at the mud on her sweater. Her mop leaned against the wall behind her, forgotten for a moment. The man from across the street was now walking toward her, his footsteps calm and steady. He wasn't dressed like most of the people who came to Varel Plaza. No shiny shoes, no expensive coat, just a plain jacket, dark jeans, and a quiet presence that seemed to carry more weight than loud voices ever could. Nora felt nervous. Was he coming to ask something? Complain about the mess? Her stomach turned at the thought of more unkindness. But when he got closer, she noticed something in his eyes. Something gentle. A kindness that felt unusual in a world that often passed her by. He stopped a few steps away and gave a small, warm smile. "Hi," he said simply. "I'm Leon." Nora blinked. "Hi," she replied softly, unsure of what else to say. Leon's voice was calm and steady, not too loud, not rushed. "I've been watching you," he continued. Nora frowned slightly, confused. "Watching me?" she repeated, her voice uncertain. Leon nodded. "I pass by here most mornings on my way to work. I've seen you cleaning these steps, rain or shine. You're always here. You work hard, and I notice that." Nora didn't know how to respond. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Most people acted like she didn't exist. But this stranger, this man with kind eyes and a quiet voice, had noticed her work, her effort, her struggle. She looked down at her muddy shoes, her fingers tugging at the sleeves of her sweater. "It's just a job," she said quietly. "I need it." Leon nodded thoughtfully. "A job is a job, but it's how you do it that matters. And you do it with care. That's not something you see every day." Nora looked up again, meeting his gaze. There was no judgment in his face, just honesty and warmth. Then Leon reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small card. He held it out to her. Nora hesitated, then took it gently. The card was simple and white, with a name printed in clear letters. Leon Graves, Director, The Horizon Project. Underneath it read, "Helping people build better futures." She read the card once, then again. Her hands shook slightly. Leon explained, "The Horizon Project is a community program I started a few years ago. We help people who work hard but haven't had the same chances as others. Job training, education support, family care. Things that can really open a door." Nora stared at him, unsure if she was dreaming. Leon continued, "I think you have potential. I'd like to help you and your family if you're open to it." A million thoughts rushed through her head. No one had ever offered her help like this before. People always looked past her. Her family had struggled for so long. Her father's medicine was expensive, and her younger sister deserved more than she could give. And now this stranger was offering a path she had never even dared to hope for. "Why me?" she asked quietly. Leon gave a small smile. "Because you don't give up. And because the world needs more people like you to succeed." Just then, the glass doors of the building opened behind them. Camille stepped outside again, talking quickly into her phone. She didn't see Nora or Leon at first. Leon didn't turn around. But the security guard inside the building did, and he recognized him instantly. His eyes widened and he leaned over to whisper something to Camille's assistant. Camille, still scrolling through emails, barely reacted. That is, until her assistant gently tugged on her coat sleeve and whispered something into her ear. She stopped cold. Her head turned toward the steps where Leon and Nora stood. Her face paled. Leon Graves. That name meant something. Camille swallowed hard. She knew exactly who he was. A respected businessman. A speaker at leadership events. A name that donors and executives listened to. She had tried for months to get a meeting with him to sponsor one of her fashion brand's charity events. And now she realized he had seen her, just hours ago, mocking a cleaner in the rain. The same cleaner he was now speaking to like a human being, with respect. Her stomach dropped. One careless moment, one cruel sentence, and someone important had seen it all. Meanwhile, Nora stood still on the steps, clutching the business card. Leon looked at her one last time and said, "Think about it. We're here when you're ready." Then, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the quiet rain as calmly as he had arrived. Nora looked down at the card again. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. That evening, Nora walked home in the soft drizzle, the small white card still in her pocket. She felt it with her fingers over and over again, as if touching it would help her understand if this new opportunity was real. Her home was a small apartment on the third floor of an old building. The wallpaper peeled in the corners. The hallway, light flickered. But inside, the rooms were clean and filled with warmth. Her younger sister, Emile, ran to the door as soon as Nora walked in. "Did it rain all day?" Emile asked, noticing her soaked clothes. Nora gave a tired smile and nodded. "Most of it." Emile was only 10 but already wise beyond her years. She helped with chores, read quietly while Nora cooked, and never complained. Their father, Rosa, sat in a chair near the window. His breathing was slow, his body thin from illness, but his eyes still sparkled when he saw his daughters. Nora cooked a simple dinner. They ate together at a small table, plates balanced on a stack of books. Afterward, as Emile did homework, Nora pulled the business card from her pocket. She held it out to her father. "Someone gave me this today," she said. Rosa squinted at the card. "Leon Graves?" He read slowly. "The Horizon Project? I think I've heard of this." Nora explained everything. How Leon had seen her working, what he said, and what he offered. Rosa listened quietly. When she finished, he didn't say much. Just reached out and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You deserve a chance," he said. "Maybe this is it." The next day, Nora called the number on the card. She didn't expect anyone to answer so quickly, but they did. A woman named Marcy welcomed her warmly, asked a few questions, and invited her to visit the center later that week. Nora wrote down the address with shaky hands. When she arrived at the Horizon Project, the building was nothing like Varel Plaza. It wasn't tall or shiny. It didn't smell like perfume or power, but it was filled with friendly faces, clean spaces, and walls covered in drawings, quotes, and photos of people smiling. Marcy met her at the door and led her through a short tour. She explained how the program worked: training, mentoring, job, placement, even help with family needs. "We don't just help people get a job," Marcy said. "We help them build a life." Nora sat through a short interview. She was nervous, but she answered every question with honesty. She told them about her sister, her father, the cleaning job, and how hard it had been to keep up. Marcy smiled at the end. "You've already been doing the hardest job," she said, "caring for others while never giving up. Let's see what we can do for you." They offered her a spot in a training program that helped people move into office assistant roles, something steady with better hours and more growth. They also gave her vouchers for food and promised help with school fees for a meal. Nora walked home that evening with tears in her eyes, but for the first time, they were happy tears. Meanwhile, back at Varel Plaza, Camille sat in her high-rise office. Her window overlooked the city, but her thoughts kept going back to that moment on the steps, that splash of mud, that cruel remark, and the man who had seen it all. She had searched Leon's name again. Everything she found made her more uncomfortable. He wasn't just a businessman. He was someone deeply respected, someone who believed in second chances, kindness, and dignity, and he had seen her at her worst. She had sent an email to his foundation, trying to arrange a meeting. She got a polite response from Marcy saying Leon's schedule was full for the next 2 months. That was it. Camille sat back in her chair, suddenly aware of how quiet her office felt. For the first time in years, she wondered if she had been chasing the wrong things: status, money, attention, while forgetting what truly mattered. A few weeks passed. Nora completed her training at Horizon with flying colors. Her kind nature and attention to detail made her stand out. They offered her a job at a nonprofit office as an assistant. It wasn't far from home, the pay was better, and the hours meant she could be there for a meal after school. One afternoon, Marcy pulled her aside and said, "Leon wanted you to know he's proud of you. He thinks you're going to help a lot of people." Nora didn't know what to say. She simply nodded, eyes glassy with emotion. That night over dinner, Emile told her, "You look different now, like lighter." Nora smiled. "Maybe I am." For the first time in a long while, the weight she carried felt a little less heavy. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew this. She had taken the first step toward something better. And this time, she wasn't walking alone. A soft breeze moved through the open space, gently stirring the leaves of the young trees planted along the walkway. The air smelled of soil and blooming flowers. In the middle of a once-abandoned lot stood a small but growing community garden, filled with color, laughter, and life. Nora stood near a table, arranging small gift bags for an event that was about to begin. It had been 2 months since she left her cleaning job. In those 2 months, her life had changed more than she ever expected. Now she worked full-time at a local nonprofit office, helping families find support for school, housing, and food. She took pride in her work, not just because it helped others, but because she knew what it felt like to be in their place. Today was a special day. The Horizon Project was celebrating the opening of the garden, a place where neighbors could grow food, share stories, and simply rest in peace. Nora had helped organize the event from start to finish. It was her first time leading something so big, and she wanted it to be perfect. Her sister Emile was helping nearby, carefully planting a small row of flowers. Their father, Rosa, sat on a wooden bench in the shade, smiling as he watched his daughters. He looked stronger these days, his health slowly improving with better care. Guests began to arrive, families, workers, volunteers, and friends from the neighborhood. Leon was already there, walking through the garden, greeting people and quietly watching the impact his foundation had helped create. Nora caught his eye from across the garden. He gave her a small nod and smile, and she smiled back. She still found it hard to believe how far things had come. Then, just as she turned back to the table, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Excuse me, Nora?" She turned and froze. Camille stood there, her tone softer than Nora had ever heard. She wasn't wearing flashy clothes today, just a simple blouse and skirt. Her posture was different too, less proud, more unsure. Nora's first instinct was to turn away. She remembered the rain, the mud, the sting of embarrassment, but instead, she stayed still and waited. Camille took a deep breath and continued, "I wanted to come here today because I owe you something. An apology." The garden around them felt quiet for a moment, as if even the leaves were listening. "Treated you terribly that day," Camille said, "and I've thought about it ever since. I don't know what I was trying to prove. Maybe I was too used to thinking people like you didn't matter. But I was wrong." She looked down, struggling with her words. "When I found out who Leon was, and what he stands for, I realized I had been seen by someone important. But more than that, I realized I had missed seeing someone else who was just as important. You." Nora looked at Camille for a long moment. The woman in front of her wasn't the same person who had walked past her on the rainy steps. Something had changed. Her voice wasn't proud anymore, it was real. Nora replied, her voice steady but kind. "Thank you. That means a lot." Camille looked relieved, though her eyes were still full of guilt. "I'm trying to do better. I joined a local program that helps mentor young women from low-income neighborhoods. I'm learning a lot, mostly how much I didn't know." Nora smiled softly. "We all start somewhere. What matters is where we go next." They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by children laughing, volunteers planting, and neighbors chatting. A community was growing, not just plants, but people. Camille gently nodded and said, "I hope someday we can work together." "Maybe we already are," Nora replied. Later that day, as the sun began to set, Nora sat beside her father and Emile on the garden bench. She looked around at everything, the flowers, the people, the paths lined with fresh soil. All of it had once been nothing more than an empty lot, just like her own life had once felt like a blank space waiting for something to grow. Leon walked by and paused beside them. "This is just the beginning," he said. Nora nodded. "It feels like something real, something that lasts." He smiled. "That's because it is." As the last of the guests began to leave, Emile ran up with a paper in her hand. "I drew this," she said proudly, holding it up. It was a picture of Nora standing tall beside a blooming flower with the sun shining down on her. Nora looked at the drawing, then at her family, then at the garden. For the first time in a long while, she felt not just hope but joy. She had weathered storms, faced unkindness, and stood alone in the rain. But now, she stood in sunlight, not because someone rescued her, but because someone believed in her. And she chose to believe in herself too. In the end, it wasn't money or power that changed her life, it was kindness.